Come home, Emily. You belong with me. Daniel Whitmore shoved a bouquet of white roses toward the woman he'd spent 5 years teaching to feel invisible, smiling like a man who had never once been told no. He didn't ask her. He informed her. And across the street, Ryan Mitchell stood frozen in his own driveway, watching the only woman he'd ever loved get pulled back toward the cage she'd barely escaped. 10 years he'd stayed silent. 10 years he'd let her go. And now, if he didn't find his voice in the next 60 seconds, he was going to lose her all over again. And he had ever truly loved being pulled back toward the cage she had barely escaped. Before we go any further, if stories about second chances and the courage it takes to finally speak your heart mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and follow Ryan's story all the way to the end. And please leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled. 10 years earlier, Ryan Mitchell had let the woman he secretly loved walk out of his life because he was too afraid to say 4 simple words. He had told himself there would always be another chance. There wasn't. And now, on an ordinary Tuesday morning outside Charlotte, North Carolina, life was about to prove that some doors are never really closed. They only wait. Ryan was 34 years old, an urban development consultant who had built a careful, quiet life in a careful, quiet neighborhood. He liked his mornings predictable. Coffee at 6, emails at 6:30, out the door by 7. He believed the way many lonely men believed that a life without surprises was the same thing as a life without pain. He was wrong about that too, but he hadn't learned it yet. That Tuesday, he was halfway to his car with his keys in one hand and his travel mug in the other when he heard the low groan of a moving truck rolling to a stop across the street. The old Harrison house had been empty for almost a year. Ryan had gotten used to its dark windows and overgrown flower beds. He glanced over out of nothing more than habit, expecting to see strangers. I saw a woman standing beside the driveway holding a clipboard, gesturing toward the front porch as 2 movers wrestled with a couch. She had long brown hair pulled back loosely, and she was laughing at something one of the men said. Ryan's first thought was simple and harmless. New neighbor. Then she turned around, and Ryan Mitchell forgot how to breathe. I knew that face. He had known it across 100 college lecture halls, across late-night study tables, across a decade of dreams he'd never admitted to anyone. The keys slipped in his hand. The travel mug tilted, and hot coffee splashed over his fingers, and he barely felt it. It was Emily Parker. For a moment, he was absolutely certain he was wrong. People saw ghosts and strangers all the time. He blinked hard. He looked again. But the truck door was open, and the name on the moving paperwork she was signing was clear enough that some part of his brain, the part that had memorized everything about her 12 years ago, simply refused to let him pretend. Emily Parker was moving in across the street. Ryan stood there so long that one of the movers waved at him. "Morning, neighbor," the man called out. "You mind if we block your driveway for 20 minutes? Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He nodded like a man who had recently been struck by lightning, climbed back up his own front steps and shut the door behind him. Then he leaned against it, heart-hammering, and said out loud to his empty house, "That is not possible." But it was, and the truth of it sat in his chest like a stone. I didn't go to work that morning. He called his office and told them he wasn't feeling well, which was not entirely a lie. He spent the next hour sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee, trying to make sense of the impossible arithmetic of it. Emily Parker had married someone. Emily Parker had moved to Washington. Emily Parker had walked out of his life so completely that he had eventually forced himself to stop wondering where she was. And now she was carrying boxes up the steps of the house directly across from his. "You're being ridiculous," he told himself. "You're a grown man. Walk over. Say hello. She probably doesn't even remember you." That last thought stopped him cold because it hurt far more than it should have. She probably doesn't even remember you. 12 years and the fear was exactly the same. That had always been Ryan's problem. Not that he felt too little, that he felt too much and said too little. He watched from behind his curtains for most of the afternoon, which he would later be deeply ashamed of. He watched her direct the movers. He watched her stand in the middle of the empty lawn with her hands on her hips, surveying the house like a woman taking inventory of a new life. He watched her sit on the front steps at one point alone, rubbing her temples, and something about the tired slope of her shoulders made his chest ache. Even from across the street, he could tell she was carrying something heavy, and it wasn't furniture. By evening, the truck was gone. Her lights came on. and Ryan Mitchell went to bed at 34 years old, feeling exactly like the 22-year-old coward he thought he'd left behind. He barely slept. He lay awake rehearsing conversations he would never have the nerve to start. In one version, he was smooth and confident. In another, he was warm and casual. In every version, morning came and he did nothing, and Emily eventually married another stranger and disappeared again, and he grew old in a quiet house across the street from the greatest regret of his life. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, he made a decision. It was the smallest, most cowardly version of courage a man could manage, but it was still more than he'd managed at 22. He would bring her coffee. That was all. 2 cups of coffee. A neighborly gesture. Nothing that required him to say what he actually felt. If she didn't remember him, he'd smile, welcome her to the street, and walk away with his dignity. If she did well, he'd figure that part out when he got there. The next morning, he stood in his kitchen holding 2 paper cups and staring at his own front door like it was the edge of a cliff. "It's coffee," he said to himself. "Just walk across the street and hand a woman a cup of coffee. Men do this every day." His hands were shaking. He made it as far as the middle of the street before his courage nearly failed. She was on the porch again, kneeling over a box of books, sorting them into stacks. She hadn't seen him yet. He could still turn around. He could still go back inside and let this be one more thing he never did. And then she looked up. Her eyes moved from the coffee cups to his face, and Ryan watched something flicker across her expression. Confusion. Then recognition. Then a kind of stunned disbelief that mirrored his own, so exactly that it almost made him laugh. "Ryan," she said. Her voice cracked slightly on the single syllable. "Ryan Mitchell." He tried to sound casual. He failed completely. "Hi, Emily." She stood up so fast, she knocked over a stack of books, and she didn't even seem to notice. "Oh my God," she breathed. "This is not real. This is not happening. You live here. Right there." He tilted his head toward his house and immediately felt like an idiot for the way his voice wobbled. "For 6 years now. I saw the truck yesterday. I thought I was seeing things. You live across the street." She pressed a hand to her mouth, and then unbelievably she laughed, a bright, startled laugh that undid 12 years of him, convincing himself he'd forgotten the sound of it. "Of all the streets in North Carolina, of all the houses, you're my neighbor." "I brought coffee," he said, holding the cups up like an offering because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. "I didn't know it was you. I mean, I did, but I told myself I was wrong. I was going to just be a friendly neighbor." "You were going to be a friendly neighbor," she repeated, and there was something soft and amused underneath the disbelief now. "Ryan, I haven't seen you in 12 years, and you show up on my porch with coffee like no time has passed at all." "I remembered you take it with too much cream," he said before he could stop himself. Emily went quiet. She looked at the cup he was holding out, and then back up at his face, and her eyes were suddenly very bright. "You remembered that?" "I remember a lot of things," he said, and then hearing how that sounded, he felt his face go hot. "About college, I mean. It was a good time." She took the coffee. Their fingers brushed for half a second, and Ryan felt it all the way up his arm and hated himself for feeling it, because he was 34 years old and this was insane. She sipped it and closed her eyes and made a small sound of surprise. "Too much cream," she confirmed. "You're a monster. This is perfect." They stood there on her porch as the morning got warmer. 2 people who had once been afraid to say a single honest sentence to each other, suddenly talking like the 12 years had been 12 days. She asked about his work, he asked about hers, and Ryan learned in pieces the shape of the life he had missed. "I was in Washington," Emily said, settling onto the top porch step and gesturing for him to sit. He did, leaving a careful, respectful gap between them. "Housing policy research. I loved the work. I did not love the rest of it." "The rest of it," Ryan repeated carefully. She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. "I got married. About 7 years ago. It's over now. That's part of why I'm here. Fresh start." She said it lightly, the way people say things they've decided not to cry about anymore. But Ryan had spent 4 years watching this woman's face, and he knew the difference between a light heart and a heart that has taught itself to sound light. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be." She glanced at him sideways. "I'm not. It took me a long time to not be sorry, but I got there." "That's a hard thing to get to." "It is." She studied him for a moment. "You're different, Ryan. You used to apologize for taking up space. Now you just sit there, like you belong wherever you are." He laughed quietly. "You'd be surprised. I still apologize for taking up space. I've just gotten better at hiding it. Something passed between them. Then an old and familiar honesty, the kind they'd only ever managed at 2 in the morning over cold cafeteria coffee. Emily looked at him a beat too long, then looked away. "I should let you get to work," she said. "I already called in sick," he admitted. "You did not." "I panicked. When I saw the truck yesterday, I couldn't function. I told my office I had a fever." Emily stared at him, and then she started laughing, really laughing, a helpless kind of laughter that bent her forward over her knees. "You took a sick day," she gasped, "because I moved in across the street. When you say it like that, it sounds pathetic." "It is pathetic. It's the most flattering thing anyone has said to me in 3 years." She wiped her eyes, still grinning. "Okay, sick day, Ryan. Since you're free, you can help me carry the heavy boxes." That was how it began. Not with a grand declaration. Not with the confession he'd been rehearsing since he was 22. Just a man carrying boxes for a woman on an ordinary Wednesday, and both of them pretending their hands weren't shaking. Over the next 3 weeks, Ryan Mitchell discovered that fate has a sense of humor. He had spent a decade believing that his chance with Emily Parker was a closed chapter, a lesson in the cost of cowardice, and now here she was, close enough that he could hear her music through his open window in the evenings, close enough that they fell into a rhythm so natural it frightened him. It started with the little repairs. Emily's new house was old, and old houses have opinions. The porch light flickered. She knocked on his door one evening holding a light bulb and looking sheepish. "I know how this looks," she said. "Woman moves in, immediately asks the neighbor to fix things. I am aware of the cliché. But I genuinely cannot reach this fixture, and I am too proud to buy a ladder I'll use once." "I have a ladder," Ryan said. "Of course you do. You've always been the man who has the thing." She followed him into his garage, looking around at the shelves of neatly labeled boxes. "This is so you, everything in its place. You were the only college student I ever knew who owned a label maker." "I still own a label maker. Ryan Mitchell." She pressed a hand to her chest in mock seriousness. "I have missed you more than I realized." He nearly dropped the ladder. She said it so easily, so lightly, but it landed in the center of his chest and stayed there for the rest of the night. The light became a window that wouldn't open. The window became a bookshelf that wouldn't fit through the doorway, which the two of them spent an entire Saturday afternoon arguing about, measuring, laughing over, and eventually disassembling on the front lawn while the neighbors watched. "This is a two-person job," Emily insisted, holding one end of the shelf. "This is a job for a person who reads the dimensions before buying furniture," Ryan shot back. "Oh, so now you're judging my life choices." "I'm judging this specific choice, this one bookshelf. You know what your problem is." She set down her end and put her hands on her hips. "You've always been right about everything, and you've always been too polite to say it. I used to want to shake you. Just once I wanted you to look at me and say, 'Emily, you are wrong, and I have a better idea.'" Ryan looked at her across the disassembled bookshelf, the afternoon sun in her hair, and something in him that had been careful for a very long time loosened just slightly. "Emily," he said, "you are wrong, and I have a better idea." She blinked. Then she grinned so wide it took years off her face. "There he is," she said quietly. "There's the man I always thought was hiding in there." The mornings became a ritual neither of them ever officially agreed to. Ryan would step outside at 6:30, and Emily would already be on her porch with 2 cups. Or he'd bring them over. They never planned it. It simply happened the way water finds the lowest path, and within 2 weeks Ryan realized he could not remember the last time he'd looked forward to a morning. They walked the neighborhood in the evenings. They went to the little Saturday market by the old mill and argued over tomatoes. And slowly the woman Ryan had built up in his memory, the perfect, unreachable girl from college, was replaced by someone far more real and far more compelling. Emily now was sharper, funnier, wearier. She had opinions forged by things she'd survived. She had a way of going quiet in the middle of a good moment, as though checking to make sure it was safe to enjoy it. And every time she did it, Ryan wanted to ask who had taught her that fear. He never asked. He was still in the ways that mattered the same careful man, but he was learning. There was one evening that changed something. A neighborhood festival, strings of lights over the community park, a local band playing songs older than most of the crowd. Ryan and Emily stood near the edge of it all, holding paper cups of lemonade, watching couples their parents' age dance slowly on the grass. "They make it look easy," Emily said, nodding at an elderly couple swaying together. 50 years probably, and they still look at each other like that." "My grandparents were married 52 years, Ryan said. My grandfather used to say the secret was that he told my grandmother the truth every single day, even when it scared him. Especially when it scared him. Emily was quiet for a moment. "That's a nice idea," she said. "Telling the truth. I'm not sure I've ever been very good at it." "You seem pretty honest to me." "I'm honest about small things. I'm a coward about the big ones." She stared out at the dancing couples, and Ryan watched her gather her courage, the way he had watched himself gather his 100 times. "Ryan, can I ask you something and you have to promise to answer honestly?" His heart began to pound. "Okay." "Back in college." She turned to face him, and the string lights caught in her eyes. "Did we ever almost become something? Because for years I've told myself I imagined it, that I made up a connection that was only ever in my head, and I need to know if I'm crazy." The question hung in the warm night air. This was the moment. This was the exact kind of moment Ryan Mitchell had spent his whole life running from. The truth was sitting right there, and every instinct he had was screaming at him to make a joke, to deflect, to keep himself safe. He took a breath. "You're not crazy," he said. Emily went very still. "Yes," he continued, his voice low and steady, in a way that surprised him. "I think we almost became something. I think we almost became something about 100 different times, and every single one of those times I talked myself out of it." "Why?" she whispered. "Because I was afraid," he said simply. "I was sure you didn't feel it. I thought you saw me as a friend. I thought if I said anything I'd ruin the only good thing I had, so I waited. I kept telling myself there'd be a better moment, a safer moment, and then you graduated and you moved away and you married someone else, and I realized the safe moment I'd been waiting for was never going to come, because I was the only thing standing in its way." Emily's eyes were shining. When she spoke, her voice was thick. "I thought you never liked me. That's what I told myself. All those years. I thought he's just a good friend and I'm the pathetic one reading into it." Ryan laughed, but it came out broken. "I thought you never noticed me." "I noticed you." She said it fiercely, almost angrily, as though the wasted years made her furious. "God, Ryan, I noticed everything about you. I used to forget my pens on purpose because I knew you'd have an extra. I used to invent reasons to walk the long way home so you'd walk with me. And the whole time I thought I was the only one, and you thought you were the only one, and we just waited," Ryan finished. "We just waited," she echoed. "Both of us. For 12 years. They stood in the glow of the festival lights, the old band playing on, and the enormity of it settled over both of them. Two people who had loved each other in silence and lost each other to nothing more than fear. It was almost too much to bear the wastefulness of it, and for a long moment neither of them could speak. Then Emily laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "This is insane. Do you understand how insane this is? We could have had all of it. We could have had years." "We have now," Ryan said quietly. The words hung there, and Emily looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something hopeful and terrified, and guarded all at once. She opened her mouth to answer, and then her phone rang. She glanced down at the screen, and Ryan watched every bit of warmth drain out of her face in an instant. Her whole body went rigid. The joy of the moment vanished so completely that it was as if someone had thrown a switch inside her. "I have to take this," she said, her voice suddenly flat and strange. "Emily, what is it? What's wrong?" She was already stepping away, already pressing the phone to her ear, already turning her back to him. But before she did, Ryan caught the name glowing on the screen, and though it meant nothing to him yet, though he had no idea of the storm it would bring across the street and into their fragile new beginning, he saw the way Emily's hand trembled as she answered. "Daniel," she said into the phone in a voice Ryan had never heard her use. "Why are you calling me?" And whatever the man on the other end said next made Emily Parker close her eyes, take one slow shaking breath, and go completely silent in the warm and golden night. Emily stood with her back to Ryan for what felt like a very long time. The phone pressed hard against her ear, her free hand clenched into a fist at her side. Ryan couldn't hear the words on the other end, but he could hear the tone of them, low and smooth and insistent, and he could see what they were doing to her. Her shoulders climbed higher and higher toward her ears. Her breathing had gone shallow. "No," she said finally, and her voice cracked on the single word. "No, Daniel, you don't get to call me and act like nothing happened. You don't get to do that." Ryan took a step toward her, then stopped himself. This was not his conversation. But every instinct he had was pulling him forward, because the woman he had spent 12 years loving was standing 3 feet away from him, coming apart at the seams, and he did not know how to help her. How did you even get this number? Emily demanded. There was a pause, then a bitter, disbelieving laugh. My mother gave it to you. Of course she did. Of course. She pressed 2 fingers to her forehead. Daniel, I moved 400 miles to get away from this. From you. From all of it. And you found a way to reach into my new life anyway because that's what you do. That is exactly what you do. Ryan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He didn't know who Daniel was, not yet, but he knew that voice Emily was using. It was the voice of someone who had learned over years to brace for impact. I don't care that you've changed, Emily said. I don't care what you've realized. Do you understand me? It's too late. It was too late a long time ago. Another pause. Her jaw tightened. Don't you dare come here. I mean it, Daniel. She hung up before he could answer. She stood there staring at the dark screen, her chest rising and falling, and when she finally turned around, the joy that had been on her face 10 minutes ago was gone, as if it had never existed at all. I'm sorry, she said. I have to go home. Emily. Ryan closed the distance between them gently. Are you okay? What just happened? Nothing. It's nothing. It's just... She shook her head and he watched her physically try to gather herself, watched her paste something calm over the panic. It's my ex-husband. That's all. He does this. He calls, he apologizes, he tries to pull me back in. I'm fine. I just need to go home. That didn't look like nothing. Ryan. She said his name softly, but there was a warning in it, a door quietly closing. Please, not tonight. I had such a good night. I don't want him to be part of it. Can we just say goodnight and pretend that call didn't happen? He wanted to push. Every part of him wanted to push. But he had spent his whole life being the man who gave people room, and so he gave her room now, even though it felt wrong. Okay, he said. I'll walk you home. It's across the street. I know. I want to anyway. She almost smiled at that. Almost. They walked back through the thinning festival crowd in silence, the string lights swaying overhead, and when they reached her porch, she turned to him with an expression he couldn't read. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for the honesty, for all of it. I meant what I said, about noticing you, about all those years. She looked down at her keys. I just need you to know that whatever that phone call was, it doesn't change what I told you tonight. Okay? He doesn't get to change that. Okay, Ryan said. But he didn't believe her. Not because he doubted her heart, but because he had seen the way her hand shook, and he knew that some men do not accept the word no as an ending. Some men treat it as the opening line of a negotiation. He watched her go inside. He watched her lights come on. And then he walked back across the street to his own quiet house and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about the name on that phone screen and the fear in Emily's voice, and knowing with a certainty he couldn't explain that the man named Daniel was not going to stay 400 miles away. He was right. The change in Emily over the next few days was small but unmistakable to a man who had made a study of her face. She still came out for morning coffee. She still laughed at his jokes. But there was a new tension underneath everything, a watchfulness. She checked her phone more often. She flinched just slightly whenever a car she didn't recognize drove down the street. And twice when Ryan asked if she was all right, she gave him a bright, quick answer that ended the conversation before it could start. On the 4th morning, he decided he'd had enough of pretending not to notice. Emily, he said, setting his coffee down on her porch step, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know that you don't have to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. She went still. Okay. Who is Daniel, and why are you afraid of him? For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She wrapped both hands around her cup and stared out at the street, and Ryan let the silence sit the way his grandfather had taught him, because sometimes silence is the only invitation people can accept. I'm not afraid of him, she said finally. Then she laughed a small, hollow sound. That's a lie. I'm a little afraid of him. Not the way you're thinking. He never hit me. I want to be clear about that because people always assume, and it wasn't that. She turned the cup in her hands. It was quieter than that. It was worse than that in a way because there was never anything I could point to, nothing I could show anyone. What was it? Emily was quiet for a moment, choosing her words. Daniel Whitmore is the most charming man you will ever meet, she said. Everyone loves him. My family loves him. When we got married, my mother told me I'd won the lottery, and for the first year I thought so too. He was attentive. He was generous. He remembered everything I said. She swallowed. And then slowly, so slowly I didn't even notice it happening, everything I was started to disappear. Ryan didn't move. He barely breathed. He had opinions about everything, she went on. What I wore, who I saw, how I spent my time. He never demanded anything. He never raised his voice. He just suggested, constantly. And every suggestion was framed as concern. Are you sure you want to wear that? I only ask because I love you. Do you really need to see those friends? They don't treat you the way I would. He made me feel like every choice I made on my own was a small betrayal of him. She let out a shaky breath. By the third year, I didn't recognize myself. I'd stopped talking to half my friends. I'd given up a promotion because he thought the hours would hurt our marriage. I was a housing researcher who'd published papers, and I couldn't decide what to have for dinner without wondering what he'd think. Emily, Ryan said quietly. The worst part, she said, and her voice broke a little, is that I let it happen. I keep coming back to that. I'm a smart woman, Ryan. I have a doctorate. And I let a man convince me one tiny suggestion at a time that I wasn't capable of running my own life. So don't tell me it wasn't my fault, because I've heard that and it doesn't help. I know it wasn't all my fault, but I was there. I let the door close on myself 1 inch at a time. Ryan wanted more than he had ever wanted anything to tell her all the ways she was wrong about that. But he understood in that moment that what she needed was not to be corrected. What she needed was to be heard. So he simply said, "What made you leave?" She was quiet for a long time. "There was a night," she said slowly, "about 1.5 years ago. We were having dinner with his colleagues, and one of them, a woman, asked me what I did. Just a normal question. What do you do? Emily and I opened my mouth to answer, and Daniel answered for me. He said, "Oh, Emily used to do research, but now she takes care of the important things," and he smiled at me, and everyone laughed, and I sat there and realized that I had become a footnote in my own life. Used to. That's the word that did it, used to. She looked at Ryan, and her eyes were dry now, but there was something fierce in them. I went home that night, and I couldn't sleep, and I got up around 3 in the morning, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I asked myself one question. If nothing changes, is this the life I want to be living in 10 years? And the answer was so loud and so immediate that it scared me. No, not one more day. So I started making a plan. It took me 8 months. I opened my own bank account. I reconnected with an old colleague who offered me a research position. I found a lawyer. And one day, when Daniel was at a conference, I packed what mattered and I left, and I did not tell anyone where I was going because I knew if I did, he'd talk me out of it. He'd suggest me right back into the cage. Bye. That took incredible courage, Ryan said. It took desperation, Emily corrected. There's a difference. I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because I was drowning, and drowning people will do anything to get their head above water. She finally looked at him fully. So that's who Daniel is. And when he calls and says he's changed, part of me knows exactly what that means. It means he's found a new script, a better one. And the terrifying thing, Ryan, the thing I can't say to anyone else, is that some small, broken part of me still wants to believe it, even after everything. That's what he did to me. He made me doubt my own certainty. Ryan reached over and very carefully covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. "You're not doubting your own certainty," he said. "You just told me the whole story without a single crack in it. You know exactly who he is. The fact that a part of you still wishes it were different doesn't mean you're weak. It means you loved someone, and it's hard to stop wishing the person you loved had been real." Emily stared at him. Her lip trembled. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Say the exact thing I needed to hear." She let out a wet laugh. "You always did that. In college, I'd be spiraling about something and you'd say one quiet sentence and it would just fix it." "I've had 12 years to think about the things I should have said to you," Ryan said. "I've got a backlog." She laughed for real that time, and the tension in her shoulders eased just a little. But even as she laughed, Ryan felt the dread in his own chest sharpen, because he understood now what they were up against. Daniel Whitmore was not a man who broke down doors. He was a man who talked his way through them, and that Ryan knew was far more dangerous. The days that followed were, for a little while, some of the best of Ryan's life, precisely because he now understood how fragile they were. He stopped waiting for perfect moments. When he thought something kind, he said it. When Emily looked tired, he asked why. When she went quiet in the middle of a good afternoon, that old habit of bracing for impact, he'd gently say, "Where'd you go just now?" And she'd blink and come back to him, and each time it happened a little faster. "You're relentless," she told him one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sun go down. You know that you just keep showing up. You keep asking. Most people would have gotten tired of my walls by now. I spent 12 years being the person who didn't ask, Ryan said. I've decided I don't like that person very much. She looked at him for a long moment. I think I like this version of you even more than the one I remember, she said quietly. And I remember liking the old one an awful lot. There it was again, that thing hanging in the air between them, that gravitational pull that had been building for weeks. Ryan felt himself lean toward it. Emily's eyes dropped to his mouth for just a fraction of a second, and then a car turned onto the street. Ryan felt Emily go rigid beside him before he even registered why. It was a black sedan, sleek and expensive, and completely out of place on their modest street, and it slowed as it passed her house, as if the driver were reading the numbers, and then it kept going, turned at the end of the block, and disappeared. Emily, Ryan said. She was on her feet. Her coffee had spilled across the porch step, and she hadn't even noticed. That's his car, she said. Her voice had gone strange and flat. That's Daniel's car. Are you sure it just drove past? Maybe it was... I know his car, Ryan. She wrapped her arms around herself. I spent 5 years riding in that car. That's him. He's here. He said he wouldn't come, and he came anyway because he never once in his life let my no mean no. Ryan stood up slowly. Okay. Then we deal with it. You're not alone this time. That's the difference. Whatever he came here to do, he's not doing it to you alone in a house 400 miles from anyone who knows the truth. He's doing it across the street from me. Emily looked at him, and something moved behind her eyes, a flicker of the woman she'd been before Daniel had taught her to shrink. You'd really stand between me and that... I'd stand between you and anything, Ryan said, and he meant it so completely that it frightened him. The black sedan did not come back that night, but it came back the next day, and the next. Each time it did, the same thing slowed as it passed, lingered just long enough for Emily to see it, then drove away. It was a message, and both of them understood it. I'm here. I'm patient. I can wait as long as it takes. He's doing it on purpose, Emily said on the third day, sitting at Ryan's kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. He wants me to know he's close. He wants me to be thinking about him. He wants me scared and off balance so that when he finally does knock on my door, I'll be so relieved to just get it over with that I'll let him in. She pressed her palms against her eyes. It's what he does. He builds the pressure until you'll agree to anything to make it stop. Then don't play his game, Ryan said. The next time that car comes down the street, you're here with me and we don't even look at it. We don't give him the reaction he's paying for. Emily lowered her hands and looked at him. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, but it's true. He only has the power you give him by being afraid, so we're going to be less afraid, together. For a moment she just looked at him, and then she reached across the table and took his hand, and this time she was the one who held on. I have to tell you something, she said, and I need you to not say anything until I'm done, because if you interrupt me, I'll lose my nerve. Ryan nodded. When I moved here, I promised myself I wouldn't do this again, she said. I wouldn't fall into anything. I wouldn't let another person become the center of my life, because look what happened last time. I was going to be alone for a while, on purpose. I was going to relearn how to be a whole person by myself before I let anyone else in. She took a breath. And then a man walked across the street with 2 cups of coffee and remembered how I take mine, and every single one of my careful little rules went straight out the window. Ryan opened his mouth. Emily raised a finger. I'm not done, she swallowed. I'm scared, Ryan. I'm scared because the last time I felt safe with someone, it turned into the worst years of my life. And I look at you, and everything in me says, this one is different, this one is good, and then another voice says, that's exactly what you thought last time. So I don't fully trust myself. Do you understand? It's not that I don't trust you. It's that Daniel broke the part of me that's supposed to be able to tell the difference. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were full. So when I flinch, she said, or when I go quiet, or when I pull back for no reason, you can see, I need you to know it's not you. It's the alarm system he installed in me going off at the wrong times, and I don't know how long it'll take to fix. Maybe it never fully does. So before this goes any further, you should know what you'd be signing up for. You'd be signing up for someone who's still learning how to believe that kindness is real. Ryan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. Can I talk now? She nodded, wiping her eyes. I waited 12 years for you, he said. 12 years, Emily. And I spent almost all of that time believing I'd missed my one chance, and it was gone forever. Do you have any idea what it did to me the morning I saw you across that street? I couldn't go to work. I sat in my house and shook, because life had handed me the exact thing I'd given up hoping for. He tightened his grip on her hand. You think a few flinches are going to scare me off. You think I care that you need time. Or that some nights the alarm goes off for no reason. I would wait 12 more years for you. I would wait 12 more years just for the chance to prove to you that kindness is real. That's not signing up for a burden, Emily. That's signing up for the best thing that has ever happened to me. Emily made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. You can't just say things like that. I spent a decade not saying things like that, Ryan said. I'm making up for lost time. She got up from her chair, came around the table, and for a moment Ryan thought she was going to kiss him, and his heart nearly stopped. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him and held on her face pressed against his shoulder, and he held her back, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said. They stayed like that until the sound of a car engine drifted through the open window. Emily stiffened in his arms. Ryan looked over her shoulder through the window out at the street. The black sedan was rolling slowly past again, but this time it did not keep going. This time, as they watched, it turned smoothly into Emily's driveway across the street. The engine shut off. The driver's door opened. Emily pulled back from Ryan's arms, her face white. He's here, she whispered. He's actually here. He's at my house. Ryan watched a tall man in an expensive suit step out of the car. He watched him reach back inside and pull something out. And even from across the street, even through the window, Ryan could see clearly what it was that Daniel Whitmore had brought with him to the doorstep of the woman he refused to let go. A bouquet of white roses. Emily's breath was coming fast and ragged now. I can't, she said. I can't do this. I'm not ready. I told him not to come, and he came anyway, and now he's standing at my door, and I can't. Ryan took her by the shoulders gently and turned her to face him. Look at me, he said. Emily, look at me. She did. You are not going out there alone, he said. Do you understand? Whatever happens next, you are not doing it alone. Not this time. He does not get to corner you the way he used to, because this time there's a witness, and this time there's a door you can walk back through, and it leads right here to me. He held her gaze. You get to decide how this goes. Not him, you. And whatever you decide, I'm right here. Now. Do you want to answer that door, or do you want me to go tell him to leave? Emily stared at him, her chest heaving. 12 years and one ruined marriage, and a lifetime of being told to make herself smaller, all crashing together behind her eyes. And then slowly something in her expression shifted. The panic didn't leave entirely, but underneath it something else rose up to meet it. Something that looked for the first time like the woman who had once packed her bags in the dark and driven 400 miles toward a life of her own. No, she said, and her voice was still shaking, but there was steel underneath it now. No, I'm not sending you to fight my battle. I'm not hiding in your kitchen while he stands on my porch. I did that for 5 years, Ryan. I let other people decide things about my life. Not anymore. She wiped her face, straightened her spine, and took a long, steadying breath. I'm going to go out there, and I'm going to say what I should have said a long time ago, and I need you to do something for me. Anything. Just be where I can see you, she said. That's all. Don't fight him. Don't say anything. Just stand where I can see you, so that when the old voice in my head starts telling me to give in, I can look across the street and remember that there's another way to be loved. She swallowed hard. Can you do that? Ryan nodded, his throat tight. I'll be right here, every second. Emily walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob, and then she paused and looked back at him over her shoulder and said something so quietly he almost missed it. For the record, she said, if I get through this, the answer to the question you didn't quite ask on my porch that night at the festival, the answer is yes. And before Ryan could respond, before he could even fully understand what she meant, Emily Parker opened the door, stepped out into the afternoon, and walked across the street toward the man who had spent years teaching her to be afraid, holding his roses and his rehearsed apology, and his absolute certainty that she would come home. Ryan stood at his window and watched Emily cross the street with her shoulders squared, and he had never in his life been so afraid and so proud at the same time. Every part of him wanted to follow her, to plant himself between her and the man in the expensive suit. But he had promised, just be where you can see me. So he moved to his open front door, stepped out onto his own porch, where the afternoon light would catch him, and stood there visible steady. A lighthouse for a woman walking into a storm. Daniel Whitmore heard her coming before he saw her. He turned and his face broke into a smile so warm and so practiced that even from across the street, Ryan felt his stomach turn. It was the smile of a man who had never once doubted he would get what he wanted. "There she is," Daniel said, and his voice carried smooth as poured honey. "God, Emily, you look incredible. You look happy. This place agrees with you." Emily stopped a careful distance from him, just out of arm's reach. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." I know you told me not to come." He held the roses a little higher in offering. "But some things you can't say over the phone. Some things a man has to say to your face, or he'll regret it the rest of his life. And I've done enough regretting to last me the rest of mine." He took a step toward her. "Can we talk? Just talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "You drove past my house for 3 days," Emily said. "That's not a man asking for 5 minutes. That's a man making sure I couldn't sleep." Something flickered across Daniel's face just for a second, a crack in the warmth. Then it was gone, smoothed over. "I was working up the courage," he said. "You think this is easy for me, coming all this way, not knowing if you'd even open the door." He shook his head, and his eyes went soft and wounded in a way Ryan recognized because he'd seen it on 100 faces of men who had learned that looking hurt got them what force couldn't. "Emily, I've spent a year and a half becoming the man I should have been when you were still mine. I went to counseling, real counseling twice a week. I read everything. I did the work. And every single day of that work, all I could think was, I hope it's not too late. I hope she gives me one more chance to show her who I really am." Emily was silent, and Ryan, watching from across the street, felt his heart clench because he could see it working. He could see the tiny softening in Emily's posture, the pull of the old script, the part of her that still wished against all reason that the man she'd married had been real. "You went to counseling," Emily said slowly. "Twice a week, for a year." Daniel took another step closer, and now he was near enough to lower his voice, though it still carried in the quiet street. "I know what I did, Emily. I know I made you small. My therapist has a word for it. Coercive control. I didn't even know it had a name. I thought I was loving you. I thought I was protecting you. And I was so wrong, and it took losing you to see it." His eyes glistened. "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to say I understand now. And I will spend the rest of my life making it right if you'll let me." Ryan watched Emily's hand come up to her mouth. He watched her waver, and he understood with a sick certainty that this was the most dangerous version of Daniel there could possibly be, because this Daniel had learned the language. He had taken the very words that should have set Emily free and turned them into a new kind of leash. He had weaponized her own healing against her. "You even know the word for it," Emily whispered. "I know all the words for it now," Daniel said gently. "Coercive control, emotional isolation. I made you doubt your own judgment. I know. And I hate the man who did that. I'm not him anymore." For a long moment, Emily said nothing. And then she did something that made Ryan's breath catch. She laughed. It was a small laugh, low and disbelieving, and it had no fear in it at all. "That's very good," she said. "That's genuinely very good, Daniel. A year and a half ago, you couldn't have named a single thing you did wrong, and now you have the whole vocabulary. You've got the therapy words. You've got the wounded eyes. You practiced this whole speech in the car, didn't you? I can hear the rehearsal in it." Daniel's smile faltered. "Emily, no, let me finish. You had your 5 minutes, now I get mine." She took a step toward him now, and it was not a step of surrender. "You want to know how I know you haven't changed? Because a changed man wouldn't have driven past my house for 3 days to make sure I was afraid. A changed man wouldn't have gotten my number from my mother behind my back. A changed man wouldn't have shown up at my door after I explicitly told him not to holding flowers, so certain I'd cave that he didn't even consider I might not. You learned the words, Daniel. You didn't learn the lesson. The lesson was that my no means no, and you still don't believe it does." The mask slipped. Ryan saw it happen from across the street, saw the warmth drain out of Daniel Whitmore's face, and something colder and older move in behind his eyes. It lasted only a second. Then the charm came flooding back, but Emily had seen it too, and Ryan watched her see. It watched the last piece of doubt burn away in her chest. "You're upset," Daniel said, his voice tightening at the edges. That's fair. You have every right to be upset. I hurt you. But Emily, be reasonable. You moved to the middle of nowhere. You're living across the street from what some guy... His eyes flicked toward Ryan on his porch, and his lip curled just slightly. Is that what this is? You found some quiet little nobody to feel safe with? That's not a life, Emily. That's hiding. I'm offering you your real life back. Our house, our friends, everything we built. Everything you built, Emily said. I was just the thing you kept in it. That's not fair. It's completely fair, and you know it. Her voice was steady now, steadier than Ryan had ever heard it. You want to know the difference between you and the quiet little nobody across the street? He brought me coffee and remembered how I take it. That's it. That's the whole thing. He remembered a small, true thing about me, and he never once tried to make me smaller. You gave me a house and a ring and a whole beautiful life, and every day inside it, I disappeared a little more. He hands me a cup of coffee, and I feel more like myself than I did in 5 years of marriage to you. Daniel's jaw tightened. He was quiet for a moment, recalculating, and Ryan could almost see the machinery turning behind his eyes, the man searching for a new angle, a new key to the lock. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The honey was gone. Something quieter and uglier had replaced it. Your mother thinks you're making a mistake, he said. Emily went still. She does. We talk, you know. She's worried about you. She thinks you had a breakdown running off like that, throwing away a marriage over what she calls a rough patch. He let that land. Your whole family thinks I'm the one who got wronged here, Emily. The devoted husband whose wife just vanished one day. That's the story they know. That's the story everyone at home knows. You want to build a new life out here with your coffee man, fine. But understand what you're walking away from. Everyone who loves you thinks you're the one who broke this. And there it was, the real Daniel Whitmore, stripped of the therapy words and the wounded eyes. Not a man who had changed, a man who had simply found a colder lever to pull when the warm one stopped working. Ryan took a step forward on his porch before he could stop himself. He wanted to cross that street. He wanted to put himself between Emily and every word coming out of that man's mouth. But he'd promised. And so he stayed gripping the porch rail so hard his knuckles went white, and he trusted her, and it was the hardest thing he had ever done. He didn't need to worry. Emily looked at Daniel for a long, quiet moment, and when she spoke, her voice didn't shake at all. There it is, she said softly. There's the man I married. Thank you. I was starting to feel guilty. I was standing here listening to your therapy speech, and a part of me was thinking, what if he really did change? What kind of person am I to slam the door on a man who worked so hard? And then you did what you always do. The warmth stopped working, so you reached for the fear. My mother, my family, the story. You just handed me the proof, Daniel. You just showed me you're exactly the same. She shook her head slowly. You didn't spend 1.5 years becoming a better man. You spent 1.5 years becoming a better manipulator. And that right there is the difference you'll never understand. Emily, I'm not finished. She held up her hand, and Daniel, to Ryan's astonishment, actually stopped talking. You want to talk to my mother? Go ahead. Tell her whatever story you want. I spent 5 years managing what everyone thought of us, protecting your reputation, making excuses for why I seemed so tired all the time, so quiet, so faded. I'm done doing your public relations. If my family believes you over me, then that's a conversation I'll have with them, one I should have had a long time ago. But I am not coming home to a cage because I'm afraid of what people might think of the woman brave enough to leave it. For the first time, Daniel Whitmore had nothing to say. And then Emily did the thing that Ryan would remember for the rest of his life. Daniel, out of some last desperate instinct, thrust the roses toward her, that final prop, that last piece of the performance. At least take the flowers, he said, and there was something almost pleading in it now, the sound of a man watching his certainty crumble. I bought them for you. Please, just take the flowers. Emily looked at the roses, then she looked at the man holding them. No, she said, one word, quiet, complete. I don't want your flowers, Daniel. I don't want your apology. I don't want the house or the friends or the life. I left because I finally chose myself, and I would rather live in the smallest house on the quietest street for the rest of my life than spend one more day being the beautiful thing in someone else's collection. She took a breath. Go home, and don't come back. If you drive past my house again, if you call my mother again, if you show up here one more time, I will get a lawyer. And I will get an order of protection. And I will make sure the story everyone at home hears is the real one. Do you understand me?" Daniel stared at her. The roses hung limp in his hand. And Ryan watched the exact moment the man understood he had lost. Watched the charm and the warmth and the calculated wound all drain away, leaving behind only what had always been underneath. Cold, empty, furious in a quiet, contained way that was somehow worse than shouting. "You're going to regret this," Daniel said. His voice had gone flat. "Maybe," Emily said, "but it'll be my regret, mine, and I haven't been able to say that about anything in a very long time." For a moment, the two of them stood there, and Ryan's whole body was coiled, ready to move if Daniel took one step in the wrong direction. But Daniel Whitmore was not a man who did anything in front of witnesses. He glanced once more across the street at Ryan, and his eyes narrowed, and then he did the thing that men like him always do when the audience turns against them. He rearranged his face into the mask of the wounded, reasonable man, and he sighed heavy and theatrical. "I came here to make things right," he said, loud enough to carry loud enough for the neighbors, for Ryan, for anyone listening. "I drove all this way, and this is how you treat me, after everything." He shook his head sadly. "I hope he's worth it, Emily. I hope your coffee man is worth throwing your whole family away." "He didn't ask me to throw anything away," Emily said. "That's the whole point. You never could tell the difference between loving someone and owning them." Daniel didn't answer. He turned, walked back to his black sedan, and set the roses down on the hood for a moment as he opened the door, an oddly deliberate gesture, like a man leaving evidence of his own generosity behind. Then he got in, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. As the car pulled away down the street, Ryan saw Emily standing perfectly still in her front yard, watching it go, her arms wrapped around herself. The sedan reached the end of the block and turned and was gone. And Emily Parker stood there for one more moment, and then her knees seemed to give out from under her, and Ryan was already moving, already off his porch and across the street before she'd even finished sinking down onto the grass, and he caught her, and she grabbed the front of his shirt in both fists and pressed her face against his chest, and finally let herself fall apart. "I did it," she said. And now the shaking came, all of it at once, the fear she'd held back for the entire confrontation, flooding out of her in great heaving waves. "I did it. I said no. I actually said no to his face." "You did," Ryan said, holding his hand on the back of her head. "You did it. I watched the whole thing. Emily, you were magnificent. You were the bravest person I've ever seen." "I was so scared." She was half laughing, half crying now, the two tangled together. "I was standing there, and my heart was going so fast I thought I'd pass out, and the whole time this voice in my head was screaming, 'Just take the flowers. It's easier, just take them and make it stop.' But you didn't." "But I didn't." She pulled back and looked up at him. Her face wet, her eyes wide and stunned like a woman surfacing from underwater. "I looked across the street. I looked at you standing on your porch, and I remembered what you said, that there's another way to be loved. And I didn't take the flowers." She laughed again, disbelieving. "Ryan, I didn't take the flowers." He wanted to say 100 things. Instead, he just held her there on her front lawn in the middle of the afternoon and let her shake and let her cry and let her slowly come back to herself. And after a while, the shaking eased and her breathing steadied, and she stayed there in his arms, not because she needed to be held up anymore, but because she wanted to be. "I need to tell you something," she said eventually, her voice muffled against his shirt. "And I need to say it now while I'm still brave before the fear comes back and I overthink it." "Okay." She pulled back so she could look at him. "When I was standing out here," she said, "and he was doing his whole performance, and part of me was wavering, do you know what pulled me back every single time? It wasn't anger at him. I've been angry at him for years, and it never made me strong. It was you. It was the thought of you standing on that porch, and the thought that if I went back to Daniel, I'd never get to find out what this could have been, what we could have been." Her voice broke. 12 years, Ryan. We wasted 12 years being afraid, and I stood in that yard and I thought, I am not wasting one more day, not one more. Ryan's throat was so tight he could barely speak. "Emily, I meant what I said before I walked out there," she said. "The answer is yes. Whatever you were going to ask me on that porch at the festival, whatever you've been too careful to say, the answer is yes. It's been yes for 12 years. I was just too scared to know it, and then too broken to trust it, and now—" She shook her head, laughing through the tears. "Now some quiet little nobody with a label maker and 2 cups of coffee has gone and made me brave enough to say it out loud." And Ryan Mitchell, who had spent his entire life waiting for the perfect moment, who had let one woman walk away because he was too afraid to speak, looked down at Emily Parker, sitting in the grass with her tear-streaked face and her fierce, exhausted, triumphant eyes, and he understood that the perfect moment had never existed. There was only this: 2 people and the truth and the courage to finally stop waiting. "I have loved you," he said slowly, carefully, every word deliberate, "since I was 22 years old. I loved you across 100 lecture halls, and I loved you every single day you were gone, even when I made myself stop thinking your name, and I have spent 12 years believing I would never get to say this to you." He took her face in his hands. "So I'm going to say it now, and I'm never going to make you wait for anything again. I love you, Emily. Not the girl I lost. You. The woman who just stood in her own front yard and told the man who tried to erase her that she wasn't going anywhere. I love that woman. I love all of who you've become. And I am not going anywhere either. Not for 12 years. Not ever." Emily let out a sound that was pure relief, pure release, 12 years of held breath leaving her all at once. And she didn't say anything back because there was nothing left to say. Instead, she leaned forward there on the grass in the plain light of an ordinary afternoon, with the abandoned roses still sitting on the empty driveway across the street where Daniel had left them, and she kissed him. And Ryan kissed her back, and it was not the desperate, dramatic thing either of them had imagined all those years ago. It was quiet, and it was certain, and it tasted like the beginning of everything they'd almost never had. When they finally broke apart, Emily rested her forehead against his and let out a long, shaky breath. "He said I'd regret this," she whispered. "Do you—" She pulled back and looked at him, and for the first time since the black sedan had first rolled down their street, there was no fear in her face at all, just something clear and steady and free. "No," she said. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I don't regret a single thing." Then her expression flickered, and a shadow of the old worry crossed her face. "But Ryan, you need to understand something about Daniel. He said I'd regret this, and he said it in that quiet voice, the one he uses when he means it. Men like him don't lose gracefully. He drove away today because there were witnesses. But he is not done. I know him. This isn't over. He's just going to find a way to make it hurt where no one can see." And as she said it across the street, a small breeze stirred the white roses lying on the hood of the empty driveway, and Ryan felt the warmth of the moment cool by a single degree, because he knew deep in his gut that the woman in his arms was right. Emily was right. It started 3 days later, and it started so quietly that Ryan almost missed it. She came to his door that morning holding her phone, and her face was pale in a way he'd learned to read as trouble. "My sister called," she said. "Rachel, we haven't really talked in over a year, not since I left. And this morning out of nowhere she calls me crying, asking how I could do this to Mom." "Do what to your mom?" "That's the thing. I didn't know what she was talking about." Emily sat down heavily at his kitchen table, the place that had become hers over the past weeks. "Apparently there's a story going around the family now, that I abandoned Daniel during the worst year of his life, that he was struggling and instead of standing by him, I ran off and left him, that he's been devastated, and I've been out here living some selfish new life without a word to anyone." She looked up at Ryan, and her eyes were bright with a fury that had fear underneath it. "He got there first, Ryan. He drove home and he told them all his version before I could tell them mine, and now my own sister thinks I'm the villain." Ryan sat down across from her. "This is what he meant," he said quietly, "when he said you'd regret it. This is exactly what he meant." She pressed her hands flat against the table. "He can't reach me directly anymore, so he's going through the people I love. It's smart. It's so him. He knows I'd walk through fire before I'd let my family think I'm the kind of person who abandons someone. He knows that's my weak spot, so that's exactly where he pushed." "What did you tell Rachel?" "I tried to tell her the truth. I started explaining what it was really like, the control, the way he made me disappear. And you know what she said?" Emily's voice cracked. "She said that doesn't sound like Daniel. He's always been so kind to us. And she's not wrong, Ryan. That's the horror of it. He was always kind to them. He saved all the other stuff for when we were alone. So to them, I'm just a woman who married a wonderful man and then threw him away for no reason anyone can see. Ryan reached across the table and took her hand. So what do we do? She noticed the we. He watched her notice. It watched something in her steady at the word. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to fight it. Call every person in my family and tell them the whole story. But I know how that goes. The more I defend myself, the more it looks like I have something to defend. He set it up perfectly. If I stay quiet, he wins. If I fight, I look guilty. She let out a long breath. This is what living with him was like. Every road leads back to him being right. No, Ryan said. That was what living with him was like. This is different. You're not alone in the house with him anymore, controlling every road. You've got people out here who see the whole picture. You've got me. You can't call my family and vouch for me, Ryan. You're the coffee man he already told them about. In their version, you're the reason I left. You'd only make it worse. That landed harder than Ryan expected, because it was true. He was in Daniel's story, the other man. The convenient explanation. And there was nothing he could do to fight it without proving Daniel's point. He sat with that for a moment, the helplessness of it. Then we don't fight his story, he said finally. We just live in a way that makes it fall apart on its own. Stories like his need distance to survive. They only hold up when the people hearing them can't see the truth for themselves. So maybe the answer isn't to argue. Maybe the answer is to get one person from your family out here, to see you, to see your life, to see that you're not some woman who had a breakdown and ran off with a stranger. You're a woman who built something good. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Rachel, she said slowly, if I could get anyone to come, it'd be Rachel. She's angry, but she's here because she's scared for me, not because she hates me. Underneath the anger, she still loves me. Then invite her. She'll say no. Ask anyway, Ryan said. You spent years not asking for the things you needed. Ask for this one. It took Emily 2 days to work up the nerve, and Ryan watched her rehearse the call 3 times before she made it. When she finally dialed, he stepped out onto his porch to give her privacy, but he could see her through the window phone to her ear, and he watched her whole body brace when the call connected. He watched her talk and gesture, and at one point sink down onto a chair and cover her eyes. And then after nearly 20 minutes, he watched her go very still and lower the phone slowly and stare at it. I was back inside before she'd fully looked up. Well, she's coming, Emily said, sounding stunned. This weekend. She's driving out this weekend. She let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. She said, I don't believe you, Emily, but I'm scared enough that I need to see for myself. Which is not exactly a warm invitation, but she's coming. That's all you need, Ryan said. You don't need her to believe you before she gets here. You just need her here. But even as he said it, he could see Emily's mind already spinning forward, already dreading it, already imagining every way it could go wrong. And underneath his own steady words, Ryan felt a knot of worry of his own, because if Rachel came all this way and left still believing Daniel, it wouldn't just be a disappointment. It would be Emily's own family confirming the thing Daniel had spent 5 years teaching her, that her version of reality couldn't be trusted, that everyone else could see something about her that she couldn't. It could undo months of healing in a single weekend. Rachel arrived that Saturday, and Ryan's first sight of her told him this was not going to be simple. She was younger than Emily, sharper around the edges, and she got out of her car with her arms already crossed and her guard already up. She looked at Emily's little house and then across the street at Ryan's, and Ryan saw her do the math, saw her file him away under the category Daniel had built for him. He decided right then to stay out of it entirely for as long as he could. This was a thing between sisters. He would not give Rachel a single reason to think he was pulling strings. The first day did not go well. Ryan knew because Emily came to his door that night looking hollowed out. She keeps testing me, Emily said. Everything I say, she's checking it against Daniel's version. I told her about the control and she said, but you always used to say how thoughtful he was. I told her I felt like I disappeared and she said, Emily, you were quiet even as a kid. Every single thing I lived through, she has an innocent explanation for, because that's the explanation Daniel gave her first. She sat down and put her head in her hands. I don't think I can win this. He got to her heart before I did. How do you argue someone out of a story that's already sitting in the place where they keep the people they trust? You don't argue, Ryan said. I keep telling you, you just let her watch. Watch what we've been sitting in my kitchen being tense at each other. Then stop sitting in the kitchen. Live your life in front of her. Let her see what your days actually look like now. Let her see who you are when you're not defending yourself." He paused. "And maybe let her meet me, not as the villain from Daniel's story, just as your neighbor. Let her see the reality instead of the character he wrote." Emily lifted her head. "You'd do that? Let her interrogate you because she will. She's furious and she thinks you broke up my marriage." "I've got nothing to hide," Ryan said. "The worst thing I ever did was bring you coffee. Let her ask." So the next morning, Ryan did something he almost never did. He invited them both to breakfast, and it was, for the first hour, deeply uncomfortable. Rachel sat at his table with her walls up, answering in short sentences, watching him the way you watch a man you've already decided not to trust. She asked pointed questions. "When did you and my sister start spending time together? Did you know she was married? How convenient that you happen to live right across the street." Ryan answered every one of them honestly and without defensiveness, and slowly over eggs and coffee. Something began to shift. Because the story in Rachel's head had Ryan as a smooth operator, a man who'd swooped in on a vulnerable woman. And the man across the table from her was not that. He was careful and quiet, and he talked about Emily with a kind of reverence that no schemer could have faked. When Rachel asked a little cruelly, "So what exactly do you get out of all this?" Ryan just looked at her sister for a moment and said, "I get to know her. That's it. That's the whole thing. I loved her 12 years ago, and I never told her, and I've spent every day since she moved in, grateful that I got a second chance to just be near her. I don't need anything more than that." Rachel didn't have a comeback for that. Ryan watched the sentence go into her the way truth does, quietly without fanfare, and lodge somewhere behind the anger. But the real turn came that afternoon, and it came from a direction none of them expected. They were in Emily's kitchen, the three of them, and Emily's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and her whole face changed, and Ryan knew before she said it. "It's Daniel," she said quietly. Rachel straightened. "Answer it. Put it on speaker." "Rachel, you want me to believe you?" Rachel's voice was tight. "Then let me hear him. Not your version of him, not Daniel's version of himself. Just him right now when he doesn't know I'm listening. Answer it and put it on speaker." Emily's hands were shaking. She looked at Ryan, and he gave her a small nod, and she pressed the button and set the phone on the counter between the three of them. "Hello, Daniel," she said. "Emily." His voice filled the kitchen, warm and easy. "I'm glad you picked up. Listen, I've been thinking, and I want to apologize for how I acted when I came out there. I was emotional. I pushed too hard. That wasn't fair to you." A pause. "I heard Rachel's coming to visit you. That's good. Family's important. I hope you two work things out." Emily's jaw tightened. Rachel, standing off to the side where she couldn't be heard, went very still. "How do you know Rachel's coming to visit me?" Emily asked. A tiny hesitation. "Your mom mentioned it. I didn't tell my mom the dates." Another hesitation, and Ryan watched Rachel's expression flicker because she had heard it too, the small stumble, the recalculation. "Well, someone did," Daniel said, and the warmth in his voice had cooled by a degree. "Look, that's not important. What matters is, I want you to be happy, Emily, even if it's not with me. I just worry about you out there all alone making these big decisions when you're clearly not in a good place mentally." And there it was. Ryan saw Rachel's face change. Because Emily had told her about this, about the way Daniel always slipped it in the quiet suggestion that Emily wasn't well, wasn't stable, couldn't trust her own mind. Rachel had heard it as Emily's complaint. Now she was hearing it live from Daniel's own mouth, unprompted, smooth as anything. "I'm in a great place mentally, Daniel," Emily said evenly. "Of course you are. I'm not saying you're not." A soft, sad chuckle. "I just remember how you get. The spiraling. The way you'd convince yourself of things that weren't true. Remember the anniversary when you got it in your head that I'd been distant, and it turned out you'd just been overtired. You have such a good heart, Emily, but you've never been the most reliable narrator of your own life. That's all I mean. I worry that people out there might take advantage of that." Rachel's mouth had fallen slightly open. "People like my neighbor, you mean?" Emily said. "I didn't say that, but since you bring him up. A man who moves in on a married woman the second she's vulnerable. Come on, Emily. You're smarter than that. Or you used to be." The pity in his voice was thick, now practiced. "I just don't want to see you get hurt again. You've been through enough. And whatever this fantasy is you've built out there when it falls apart, and it will, I want you to know I'll still be here. I'll always be here for you, because unlike everyone else in your life, I actually know you. I know how fragile you really are." Emily didn't answer. She was looking at Rachel, and Rachel was looking at the phone like it had turned into something venomous on the counter. All the anger she'd carried into North Carolina, all the certainty Daniel had planted in her was draining out of her face and being replaced by a slow, dawning horror. "Daniel," Emily said quietly, "I'm going to hang up now." "Emily, wait. I really think we should—" She ended the call. Silence filled the kitchen. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rachel sat down slowly at the table as if her legs had stopped working and put both hands over her mouth. "He knew the dates," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't tell Mom the dates either. Nobody told him. He's been tracking you somehow. He knew when I was coming." "Rachel. And the way he talked about you." Rachel's eyes came up, and they were wet and stunned and horrified. "You've never been the most reliable narrator of your own life." He said that, so calmly, like it was just a fact, like it was concern. She swallowed hard. "Emily, I have heard him say things like that about you for years. At Thanksgiving, at every family dinner. 'Oh, Emily's tired, you know how she gets. Emily's a little fragile lately, go easy on her.' And I always thought he was being protective. I always thought what a good husband watching out for her." Her face crumpled. "He was doing it to us. I was building the story in front of me the whole time, and I helped him. Every time I nodded along, I helped him." Emily crossed the kitchen and knelt in front of her sister. "You didn't know." "That's the point, though, isn't it?" Rachel said. "You told me all of this yesterday in your own words, and I didn't believe you. I needed to hear it from him. I trusted his voice over yours." She looked at her sister with an anguish that went all the way down. "God, Emily, what did I do? You reached out. You must have needed me, and I chose his side, without even knowing there were sides. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And then Emily's sister put her arms around her and started to cry, and Emily held her, and Ryan quietly stood up and stepped out onto the porch to give them the room. He stood in the afternoon light with his heart pounding, and he understood that something enormous had just happened. Daniel Whitmore had made one mistake. He had talked too much. He had done the thing he always did, the thing that had worked for years. And for the first time, he had done it in front of someone who had come specifically to test the truth, and it had shattered his own story in a single phone call. When Ryan came back inside 20 minutes later, the sisters were sitting close together at the table, red-eyed but calm, and something between them had healed that Ryan suspected had been broken for far longer than a year. "Ryan," Rachel said, and her voice was different now, stripped of its guard. "I owe you an apology, too. I came here thinking you were the reason my sister blew up her life. I had a whole speech." "You don't owe me anything," Ryan said. "You came here because you love her. That's the only thing that matters." "I came here thinking I was rescuing her from a mistake," Rachel said. "And instead I found out I've been the one making the mistake. For years." She looked at Emily. "I'm going to fix it. When I get home, I'm going to tell Mom the truth. I'm going to tell everyone. And this time, I'm the witness. Nobody can say I'm the vulnerable ex-wife with the sob story. I'm the sister who went to see for herself, and I'm going to tell them what I heard on that phone." Emily's eyes filled again. "You'd do that." "I already helped him build the story," Rachel said fiercely. "The least I can do is help you tear it down." That night, after Rachel had gone to bed in Emily's spare room, Emily came across the street and sat with Ryan on his porch, and for a long time, neither of them said anything. The relief of it hung in the air between them, too big for words. "I keep thinking about what you said," Emily finally murmured. "That I shouldn't argue, that I should just let her watch. You were right. If I'd spent the whole weekend defending myself, she never would have believed me. But she watched, and then he did the rest himself." She shook her head slowly. "He's been getting away with it for so long that he doesn't even know when he's doing it anymore. It's just how he talks. He couldn't stop himself, even when the stakes were everything." "That's the thing about men like Daniel," Ryan said. "The performance is so automatic they can't turn it off. The mask isn't a mask anymore. It's just his face." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and laced her fingers through his. "I have to tell you something," she said, "and I've been trying to figure out how to say it all day." Ryan's heart picked up. "Okay." "For 5 years I believed him," she said softly. "Not all the way, not consciously, but somewhere deep down, I believed the thing he kept telling me, that I couldn't trust my own version of my own life, that I was fragile and unreliable, and that everyone else could see the truth about me that I couldn't. It was the deepest wound he left, deeper than the isolation, deeper than the control. He made me a stranger to myself. She turned to look at Ryan, and her eyes were clear. And today, I watched my sister hear him do it in real time, and I watched her face, and I saw her realize it wasn't me. It was never me. It was him the whole time. Her voice broke. Do you understand what that did? For the first time in 5 years, someone else confirmed that I'm not crazy, that my memory of my own life is real. He can't take that back now. It's out. Rachel knows, and that means I get to stop wondering. Ryan lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. You were never crazy, he said. You were the sanest person in that house. That's exactly why he worked so hard to convince you otherwise. Sane people are dangerous to men like him. They remember things. Emily laughed, a wet, exhausted, wonderful sound. How are you real? She said. 12 years I waited, and it turns out the person I was too scared to reach for is the one who was always going to say the exact right thing. I told you, Ryan said. I've got a 12-year backlog. They sat there on the porch late into the night, her head on his shoulder, and for the first time since the black sedan had rolled down their street, the future felt like something that belonged to them and not to Daniel. Rachel would go home. She would tell the truth. The story would begin to turn. But Ryan, holding the woman he loved, as the streetlights hummed and the night grew still, could not quite let go of one small, cold thought. He knew the dates. Daniel had known exactly when Rachel was coming, and no one had told him, which meant that somewhere, somehow, Daniel Whitmore was still watching, still finding ways to reach into a life 400 miles from his own. And a man who would go to those lengths, a man whose whole identity had just been exposed to the one family member he'd never gotten to, was not a man who would simply accept defeat and disappear. Emily had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Ryan looked out at the dark, quiet street at the little house across the way where her sister slept, and he made himself a silent promise. Whatever Daniel did next, however he tried to reach her, he would not do it to Emily alone. Not this time, not ever again. And somewhere out in the dark, though Ryan couldn't have known it yet, the next move was already being made. The next move came 4 days after Rachel drove home, and it did not come as a phone call or a black sedan on the street. It came as a certified letter delivered to Emily's door by a man with a clipboard, and Ryan was standing right beside her when she opened it. He watched the color drain from her face as she read. "He's suing me," she said. Her voice was flat with disbelief. "Daniel is suing me. He's claiming I took property that belonged to both of us when I left. Furniture, artwork, and account he says was joint. He's asking for damages." She looked up, and her eyes were wide and furious and frightened all at once. "It's not even about the money. Look at the amount. It's small. This isn't about money." "Then what's it about?" "It's about dragging me back," Emily said. "A lawsuit means depositions. It means I have to talk to his lawyers. It means his version of events becomes an official record, and mine has to be defended in front of strangers who don't know either of us. It means months of him being a part of my life again, legally, unavoidably. He can't reach me across the street anymore, so he found a way to reach me through the courts." Her hands were trembling around the paper. "He's telling me, in the only language he has left, that he can still make me pay attention to him, that he can still take up space in my life whether I want him to or not." Ryan took the letter from her hands and read it himself slowly. And as he did, something cold and clear settled over him, a kind of calm he didn't expect. Because Daniel Whitmore had finally made a mistake bigger than the phone call. He had taken this out of the realm of charm and manipulation, where he was untouchable, and moved it into a place with rules, records, evidence, a place where the truth could be written down and made permanent. "He thinks this scares you," Ryan said, "and I understand why. For 5 years, this is exactly what he had, control through a process you couldn't escape. But Emily, he just made a mistake." "How is this a mistake?" "Because a lawsuit has two sides," Ryan said. "He gets to make his claims under oath, but so do you, and you're not the woman he left behind who couldn't trust her own memory. You've got a sister who heard him on speaker. You've got a documented pattern. You've got a whole life out here that proves you're not the unstable person he's been describing to your family for years." He set the letter down. He's used to a courtroom of one where he's the only judge. He just walked into a real one. And in a real one, he doesn't get to be charming. He gets to be cross-examined. Emily stared at him. You really think we can fight this? I don't think we fight it, Ryan said. I think we let him hang himself with it, same as the phone call. You get a good lawyer, you tell the truth, and you let Daniel do what Daniel always does. He'll overreach. He can't help it. He'll say too much. He'll make it about control instead of property, and any decent lawyer will see it in about 10 minutes. But even as he said it, Ryan felt the weight of what he was asking her to walk back into. Months of it. The very thing she'd driven 400 miles to escape reaching back to pull her in. And he saw the fear in her, the old deep fear, and underneath his own steady voice he was afraid too, because this was no longer a confrontation on a front lawn. This was going to be long and grinding and cruel in the quiet, bureaucratic way that men like Daniel had perfected. Emily got a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Vance, a sharp woman in her 50s who had spent 20 years handling exactly these kinds of cases. And after she read the complaint and listened to Emily's story for 2 hours, she set down her pen and said something that changed everything. Emily, she said, I want to be clear about what your ex-husband has actually done here. He's filed a weak claim for a small amount of money. No lawyer files this to win money. He's filed it to keep a door open to you, to force contact. This is what we call litigation as harassment, and I've seen it 100 times. She folded her hands. Here's what I want to do. We're not just going to defend it. We're going to use it. Because now he has to answer questions under oath. And I have a feeling that a man who's been controlling the narrative for 5 years is going to have a very hard time controlling himself when someone finally gets to ask him the questions he's never had to answer. Ryan watched hope flicker across Emily's face, cautious and disbelieving. You think he'll slip? I think, Patricia said, that men like this always slip, because the thing that makes them dangerous, that absolute certainty that they're right, and everyone else is confused, is the exact thing that destroys them the moment they're under oath in front of someone who isn't impressed by them. The deposition was set for 6 weeks out, and those 6 weeks were the hardest of the whole ordeal, harder than the confrontation, harder than the letter, because they were made of waiting, and waiting was Daniel's favorite weapon. Ryan watched Emily fray at the edges. Some nights she was strong and certain. Other nights the old fear came flooding back, and she'd sit in his kitchen and say, what if I get in that room and I fall apart? What if he looks at me and I'm 28 again and I can't remember why I ever thought I could stand up to him? Then you look at me, Ryan said. I'll be there. Patricia said I can be in the room. You look across that table and you find my face, and you remember that there's another way to be loved. Same as the flowers. It worked then. It'll work now. But it wasn't only the deposition weighing on them. Because a week before it, Rachel called, and this time her news landed like a stone. I told Mom everything, Rachel said, her voice tight. I told her about the phone call, about what he said, all of it. And Emily, she didn't believe me. She said I let you poison me against a good man. She said Daniel called her crying, saying we've turned the whole family against him. A pause. Mom's going to testify for him. He's got her lined up as a character witness. Our own mother, Emily. She's going to sit in that room and say what a devoted husband he was. Ryan watched Emily receive that blow. He watched it go into her and find the softest, oldest part of her, the part that was still a daughter, still a little girl who wanted her mother to see her. And he watched her almost break. My own mother, she whispered after she'd hung up. He got my mother. Emily. No, I understand it, I do. Her voice was hollow. He's charming, and he calls her, and he cries, and he's the wounded good man, and I'm the daughter who ran off and won't explain herself. Of course she believes him. She's believed him for years. She sat down slowly. I don't know if I can do this, Ryan. I can fight Daniel. But I don't know if I can sit in a room and watch my own mother testify that the man who erased me was a saint. That might be the thing that finally breaks me. And here, Ryan did something he'd never done before. He knelt down in front of her, took both her hands, and let her see that he was afraid too. I don't know if you can either, he said quietly. I'm not going to promise you it won't hurt, because it will. It's going to be one of the worst days of your life. Your mother is going to sit across a table and choose him, and there's nothing I can do to protect you from how much that's going to hurt. He tightened his grip. But I can promise you one thing. Whatever happens in that room when it's over, you get to come home, to this street, to me. And your mother's testimony doesn't change one single thing about who you actually are. She can call him a saint from now until the end of time. It won't make it true, and it won't make you the villain. It'll just make her a woman who couldn't see her own daughter clearly. That's her tragedy, Emily. Don't let it become yours. Emily looked at him for a long moment, and something in her steadied. Not the fear leaving, the fear staying, and her deciding to walk into the room anyway. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'll do it, but I need you there the whole time. I'm not going anywhere." The day of the deposition, Ryan sat beside Emily in a small conference room with pale walls and a long table, and across from them sat Daniel Whitmore in a suit that cost more than Ryan's monthly salary, wearing the warm, patient, wounded expression Ryan had come to recognize as the man's true face. Beside Daniel sat his lawyer, and in a chair against the wall, having arrived separately, sat Emily's mother, a small, tense woman who would not meet her daughter's eyes. Patricia had warned them. "Daniel will be perfect at first," she'd said. "Charming, reasonable, sad. Let him. The longer he performs, the harder he falls when I get underneath it. Your job, Emily, is to stay calm and tell the truth. My job is to give him enough rope." And that was exactly how it went. For the first hour, Daniel was magnificent. He answered every question with gentle, rehearsed sorrow. He spoke of Emily with tenderness. He described a devoted marriage marred only by his wife's struggles, her fragility, her tendency to misread his care as control. He was so convincing that Ryan felt a flicker of the old dread and glanced at Emily and saw her jaw tight, holding on. Then Patricia began to close the trap. "Mr. Whitmore," she said pleasantly, "you've described your wife as fragile several times today, unreliable, prone to spiraling. Is that a fair summary?" "I'd say concerned, not critical," Daniel said smoothly. "I loved her. I worried about her." "Of course. Now you filed this lawsuit to recover shared property, some furniture, a piece of art, an account. Is that correct?" "Yes. The total value you're claiming is quite modest, and yet you've hired a firm whose fees will substantially exceed what you're asking for. You'll spend more on this lawsuit than you could ever recover. Can you help me understand that?" A tiny pause. "Some things are about principle, not money." "Principle, I see." Patricia flipped a page. "Mr. Whitmore, 3 weeks ago you called my client. On that call you referenced the exact dates of her sister's visit to North Carolina, dates that by all accounts no one had shared with you. How did you come to know those dates?" And there it was, the first crack. Ryan watched it happen, watched the smallest flicker of calculation cross Daniel's face, the exact same flicker from the phone call. "I must have heard it from her mother," Daniel said. "Her mother is here today. We can ask her." Patricia turned. "Ma'am, did you tell Mr. Whitmore the specific dates of your daughter Rachel's visit?" Emily's mother went pale. She opened her mouth and closed it, and finally said in a small voice, "I didn't know the dates. Nobody told me the dates." The room went very quiet, and Ryan watched Daniel Whitmore's certainty falter for the first time, watched him realize that a fact he'd let slip so small, he'd forgotten it had just become a thread that Patricia was going to pull until the whole thing unraveled. "So the dates didn't come from her mother," Patricia said mildly. "Mr. Whitmore, do you have any electronic access to my client's accounts, her location, her communications, anything that would explain how you knew her private schedule?" "I object to the characterization," Daniel's lawyer cut in. "Withdrawn. I'll rephrase." Patricia smiled. "Mr. Whitmore, would you be willing to submit your devices and accounts for examination to demonstrate that you have no improper access to my client's private information?" And Daniel, for the first time all day, hesitated a beat too long. It was a small hesitation, but it was enough, because Ryan saw Emily's mother see it. He watched the woman who had come to defend her son-in-law look at him in the silence and watch him fail to instantly say yes, of course examine anything, and Ryan saw a question form in her eyes that had never been there before. Patricia moved on, but she'd made her point, and she kept making them one after another quiet and relentless. She asked Daniel about specific incidents Emily had described, and every time his answers grew a little tighter, a little less warm. And then an hour later, she asked the question that ended it. "Mr. Whitmore, you've testified today that your wife frequently misremembered events, that she couldn't be trusted to recall your marriage accurately, that her version of things was, and I'm quoting you, not reliable." Patricia leaned forward. I want to play you something. With everyone's permission, I'd like to enter into the record a recording. A phone call placed by you to my client 3 weeks ago, which my client recorded legally in a one-party consent state." She looked at Daniel. "On this call, unprompted, you tell my client that she has never been the most reliable narrator of her own life, that she's fragile, that people out there might take advantage of her. Would you like to hear it, Mr. Whitmore, or will you stipulate that you said those things?" The blood left Daniel's face, because he understood in that instant what Ryan had understood weeks ago on his porch. The performance he couldn't turn off, the automatic reflex to make Emily doubt herself, had been captured, made permanent. It was no longer his word against hers in a room where he controlled the narrative. It was his own voice on a recording doing to Emily on tape exactly what he'd spent an hour denying he ever did. "I'd like to take a break," Daniel's lawyer said quickly. "Of course," Patricia said. "Take all the time you need." They did not come back with more fight in them. They came back, and within 20 minutes they withdrew the lawsuit entirely. No damages, no property claim, nothing. Daniel Whitmore, who had built his entire adult life on the certainty that he could talk his way through any door, had walked into the one room where talking wasn't enough, and he had lost everything he came for in the sound of his own recorded voice. But that was not the moment that mattered most. The moment that mattered came after, in the hallway outside, when Emily's mother caught up to them. "Emily," she said, and her voice was shaking. "Wait, please." Emily turned. Ryan stood beside her ready, but this was not his moment either. Emily's mother stood there small and stricken, and Ryan watched a lifetime of certainty collapse behind her eyes. "I heard it," she whispered. "The recording. I heard how he talked to you. That voice, so calm, telling you that you can't trust your own mind." Her chin trembled. "He's used that voice on me, about you, for years. Oh, Emily, every time I thought I was worried about you, it was him. He put those worries there, sentence by sentence, and I let him. I chose him over my own daughter, and I didn't even know I was doing it." Emily's face was wet. "Mom!" "I saw him hesitate," her mother said. "When she asked if he'd let them look at his phone, I saw it. A man with nothing to hide says yes right away. He didn't. And in that second, I finally saw him." She reached out with a trembling hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry it took a courtroom and a recording. You told me the truth, and I chose his voice over yours, and I will spend the rest of my life making that up to you." And Emily, who had walked into that building certain her mother would break her, stepped forward and let her mother pull her into an embrace, and the two of them stood in the hallway and wept, and Ryan stepped back and let them have it, his own throat tight, and understood that the last wall Daniel had built between Emily and the people who loved her had just come down. Not because Emily argued it down, because Daniel, given enough rope, had done exactly what men like him always do. He had shown everyone at last the face he'd only ever shown Emily alone. The drive home was quiet. Emily sat in the passenger seat, drained and hollowed out, and underneath it lighter than Ryan had ever seen her. "It's over," she said somewhere around the halfway point, as if testing whether the words were true. "It's actually over. He's got nothing left. He can't take me to court. He can't turn my family. He can't call me the unreliable one anymore. It's on a recording. It's permanent." She let out a long, unsteady breath. "I've been bracing for the next thing for so long that I don't know how to stop. When does the next thing come?" "Maybe it doesn't," Ryan said. "Maybe this is what the end of it actually feels like. Anticlimactic. Just a quiet drive home and a man who ran out of moves." Emily was silent for a while. Then she reached over and took his hand across the console. "You were right," she said. "Back at the very beginning, you said we don't fight his story, we just live in a way that makes it fall apart. And it did. Every single time he destroyed himself. The phone call, the lawsuit, all of it. All I ever had to do was tell the truth and let him be who he is." "You did more than that," Ryan said. "You stopped being afraid enough to run. That's the thing he never counted on. He built his whole strategy around the woman who couldn't stand up to him. He never planned for the woman you became." Their first real date, if you could call it that, happened 2 weeks after the deposition, once the dust had truly settled, and Emily's shoulders had finally come down from around her ears. It was nothing. It was almost embarrassingly small. Ryan put on a nice shirt, walked across the street, and knocked on Emily's door to pick her up, even though she lived 30 feet from his house. She opened the door and laughed at the sight of him standing there, dressed up, holding nothing at all because he'd learned exactly what flowers could mean to her. You know, you could have just texted me to come over, she said. I wanted this to feel real, Ryan said. Not like the guy across the street, like a man taking you out because he's wanted to for 12 years and finally gets to. Something soft moved across her face. 12 years, she said quietly. You really waited 12 years. I didn't wait on purpose, Ryan said. That's the part I'm not proud of. I waited because I was a coward. Because I kept telling myself there'd be a better moment, a safer moment, and there never was. There was just the moment I finally stopped being afraid, and that moment happened to be about 12 years too late. He held out his hand. So I'm not waiting for anything anymore. Not the right words, not the perfect time. I'm just going to keep telling you the truth every day. Even when it scares me, especially when it scares me. Emily looked at his outstretched hand, and then she looked up at his face, and Ryan watched the last of the fear leave her. The deep old fear Daniel had installed the alarm system that had gone off at the wrong times for so long. It didn't go off now. It stayed quiet. Because she finally fully believed that the kindness in front of her was real. I spent 5 years married to a man who gave me everything and made me disappear, she said. And here you are offering me nothing but the truth and a walk to a coffee shop, and I have never felt more like myself in my entire life. She took his hand. That's the whole difference, isn't it? He wanted to own me. You just want to know me. That's the whole difference, Ryan agreed. They walked to the little coffee shop 3 blocks over the same one where they'd sat months ago and admitted they'd both been waiting. They ordered the same drinks. They talked for hours the way they used to at 2 a.m. in college, except now there was nothing held back. No secret feelings buried under years of fear. No perfect moment being postponed. And at the end of the night, standing outside Emily's door, under a porch light, Ryan had fixed himself back when he was still pretending to just be a good neighbor. They finally reached the moment they'd both been too afraid to reach 12 years earlier. Emily leaned in first, and Ryan met her there. And the kiss was not the desperate dramatic thing either of them had once imagined. It was slow and certain and unafraid. It was the sound of 2 people who had survived time and fear, and one very charming, very dangerous man, and come out the other side, still able to choose each other. When they finally pulled apart, Emily rested her forehead against his and let out a breath that seemed to carry 12 years in it. He said I'd regret this, she murmured. That day in the yard. He said I'd regret choosing myself. Do you? Emily lifted her head and looked at him, and there was not one trace of doubt left in her face. Not for a single second, she said. The only thing I regret is the 12 years we lost being scared, and I'm not giving him or the fear or the past one more day of my life. It's ours now, all of it. Ryan Mitchell looked at the woman he had loved silently for a decade, the woman who had walked across a street and back into his life on an ordinary Tuesday, the woman who had stood in her own front yard and refused a bouquet of roses from the man who tried to erase her, and he understood at last the lesson it had taken him his whole life to learn. Missing your chance did not mean the story was over. Sometimes life gave you back the very thing you'd lost, not as it was, but as it should have been, and set it down 30 feet from your front door and waited to see if this time you'd be brave enough to cross the street. He had crossed it. He would never stop crossing it. And standing there on that porch under the light, he'd repaired with his own hands, holding the hand of the woman he had been too afraid to reach for. At 22, Ryan finally knew the truth that all the waiting had hidden from him for so long. The greatest love stories are not the ones that begin perfectly. They are the ones that survive time and mistakes and fear and still find their way home. Emily Parker was his home. She always had been. And this time, he was never letting her go. 1 year later, on another ordinary Tuesday morning, a moving truck stopped in front of Ryan Mitchell's house. Only this time, the boxes were going the other way. Emily stood in the middle of what had once been her living room, now empty except for a single lamp and a stack of flattened cardboard, and she looked around at the walls that had held the first year of her new life. I can't believe I'm nervous, she said. It's 30 feet, Ryan. I'm moving 30 feet across the street. People move to other continents with less anxiety than I have right now. Ryan came in carrying 2 paper cups, the same way he had a lifetime ago, and handed her one. Too much cream, he said, for old time's sake. She laughed, and it was a full, easy laugh, the kind that had taken her a long time to find again. You're going to make that joke for the rest of our lives, aren't you? That's the plan, Ryan said. I've got a whole backlog of jokes now, not just the 12 years of things I should have said. They had decided to keep both houses at first, unable to let go of the little place across the street where everything had started. But slowly they'd come to understand that a home wasn't a building. It was wherever the two of them sat with their coffee in the morning. So Emily was moving in, and they were going to rent out the house across the street to someone new, and Ryan privately hoped, though he never said it out loud, that whoever moved in would be someone lonely and afraid. Someone who needed a good neighbor to walk across the street with a cup of coffee and change their whole life. The morning of the move, Rachel arrived to help, and she arrived with news. She got out of her car, hugged her sister hard, and then held her at arm's length with a grin so wide it took up her whole face. "Mom's coming," she said, "for the wedding. She wanted me to tell you in person. She's already picked out a dress, and she's already crying about it, and she made me promise to tell you that she's proud of you. Her words, she's proud of the woman you became." Emily went very still, and Ryan watched a whole year of healing move across her face at once. It had not been simple, the road back with her mother. It had started with a single phone call 3 days after the deposition. Her mother sobbing, apologizing, not asking for forgiveness so much as asking for a chance to earn it. And Emily had given her that chance cautiously, the way you extend your hand to something that once burned you. Over the year, the two of them had rebuilt slowly, honestly, with none of the old pretending. Her mother had learned for the first time in her life to ask Emily what she remembered instead of telling her what to feel. And Emily had learned for the first time to let her mother back in without disappearing into her. "She's proud of me," Emily repeated softly. "She said it about 6 times, Rachel confirmed. And then she said, "And don't you dare tell Emily I cried," and then she cried again. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth and laughed and cried all at once, and Ryan put his arm around her, and the three of them stood in the empty living room for a moment, holding the size of it. A year ago, this woman had walked into a deposition, certain her own mother would testify against her. Now her mother was picking out a dress for her wedding. That was not nothing. That was everything. Because there was going to be a wedding. Ryan had asked her 3 months earlier, and he had not waited for the perfect moment, because he had finally learned that the perfect moment was a lie he'd told himself for a decade. He'd asked her on a random Wednesday evening on his porch over cold coffee in the middle of a conversation about nothing in particular. He'd simply stopped talking, taken her hand, and said, "I don't want to wait for a better time to do this, because I spent 12 years waiting for a better time, and it almost cost me you. So I'm going to ask you now in the least romantic way possible while we're both tired and you have a coffee stain on your shirt. Marry me, Emily. Not because it's dramatic, because I want to know you for the rest of my life." And Emily had looked at him and started to cry and said, "You couldn't have waited until I looked nice." "No," Ryan had said. "I'm done waiting for anything." And she'd said yes. Of course she'd said yes. She'd been saying yes in one way or another since the day she stood in her front yard and refused a bouquet of roses. They finished the move by early afternoon, and that evening, once Rachel had gone to check into her hotel and the boxes were stacked in the corners of Ryan's house, that was now their house, Emily and Ryan sat on the porch and watched the sun go down over the quiet street. And Emily said the things she'd been carrying all day. "I heard from someone this week," she said. "Someone you don't know, a woman named Claire. She reached out to me online out of nowhere." She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands, an old habit. "She's Daniel's new girlfriend." Ryan felt something go still and careful inside him. What did she want? She'd heard somehow that he'd been married before. "She found me, and she asked me one question." Emily's voice was quiet. "She asked me if it was normal that he'd started suggesting she didn't need to see her friends so much, that he worried about them, that he only asked because he loved her." Emily looked up and her eyes were bright and fierce. "She asked me if that was a red flag, or if she was overreacting, being fragile, reading into things." Ryan closed his eyes for a moment. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth," Emily said. "The whole thing, every word. I told her about the suggestions and how they start so small you don't even notice, and how one day you wake up and you can't decide what to have for dinner without wondering what he'll think. I told her about the used to. I told her that a man who loves you makes you bigger, not smaller. And I told her something I wish someone had told me at 28. Her voice caught. I told her that the fact she was even asking the question meant part of her already knew the answer, and that she should trust that part, because it's the part he's going to spend the next 5 years trying to convince her she can't trust. Ryan reached over and took her hand. "How do you feel?" "Free," Emily said, and she sounded almost surprised by it. "I thought I'd feel angry or scared or like he was reaching back into my life again. But I didn't. I felt like the woman I never got to be. Do you understand?" Somebody was standing exactly where I stood 5 years ago in the dark, wondering if she was crazy. And I got to be the voice I never had. I got to tell her she wasn't crazy. She wiped her eyes. "He spent years making me doubt my own memory. And now that memory is the thing that might save another woman from the whole nightmare. He took the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I turned it into the thing that pulls someone else out. That's the only revenge I'll ever want. Not that he suffers, that I get to be useful to the people he tried to break." They sat with that for a while, the streetlights humming on the evening warm and quiet around them. And Ryan thought about how far this woman had come from the person who couldn't refuse a bouquet of roses to the person who reached back into the dark to pull a stranger out of it. "Did she believe you?" he asked. "Claire." "I don't know," Emily said. "She might not. I didn't believe the warning signs either when I was in it. That's the terrible part. You can hand someone the whole map, and they still have to find their own way out." She squeezed his hand. "But I planted it. And someday when he says the wrong thing at the wrong moment, she'll remember a woman who told her the truth. And maybe that memory will be the thing that saves her. That's all any of us can do for each other, really. Plant the truth and hope it's there when they need it." The wedding was in the spring, and it was small the way both of them wanted. It was held in the backyard of the house that was now theirs, 30 feet from the house where Emily had first opened her door to a man holding 2 cups of coffee. Rachel stood up as maid of honor and cried through the entire ceremony. Emily's mother sat in the front row in her carefully chosen dress and cried harder, and when it came time to give her daughter away, she stood and held Emily's hands and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I spent too many years listening to the wrong voice. I'm so glad I finally learned to listen to yours." And then she placed her daughter's hand in Ryan's, and that was the moment Ryan understood that the last of the damage had truly healed, not erased. You don't erase 5 years of a man teaching you to disappear, but healed the way a bone heals, sometimes stronger at the break than it ever was before. Ryan had written his own vows, and when the moment came, he almost couldn't get through them. 12 years ago, he said, holding Emily's hands, his voice unsteady, "I let you walk away because I was too afraid to tell you how I felt. I told myself there would always be another chance, and I was wrong. There wasn't. You married someone else and you moved away, and I spent a decade believing that my one shot at the great love of my life was gone forever, and that it was my own fault because it was." He swallowed hard. And then on an ordinary Tuesday morning, a moving truck stopped across the street, and life gave me the one thing it almost never gives anyone, a second chance at the exact thing I'd lost. Emily was crying. Half the guests were crying. "I promise you this," Ryan went on. "I am never going to make you wait again. Not for the right words, not for the perfect moment, not for me to work up the courage to say what I feel. I spent 12 years being a coward, and I'm done. Every day I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you when I'm scared. I'm going to tell you when I'm happy. And I am going to tell you every single morning that you are not fragile, you are not unreliable, and you are the sanest, strongest, most whole person I have ever known, because you spent 5 years being told the opposite by a man who was afraid of exactly how strong you are. And I am going to spend the rest of my life reminding you of the truth he tried to steal." Emily's vows were shorter. She'd tried to write something long, she admitted, but every version had felt like too many words for something so simple. "For 5 years," she said, "I was married to a man who gave me everything and made me disappear. And then I moved across the street from a man who gave me nothing but the truth and a cup of coffee and made me feel like myself for the first time in longer than I can remember." She smiled through her tears. "Daniel wanted to own me. You just wanted to know me. And it turns out that being known is the only thing I ever actually wanted. So that's my vow. I'm going to let you know me. All of me. The strong parts and the scared parts and the parts that still flinch sometimes for no reason. And I'm going to trust that when I show you those parts, you'll do what you've done every single day since you walked across that street. You'll stay. You'll be where I can see you." Her voice broke completely. "Thank you for being the man who was worth the wait, even if we didn't know we were waiting." They were married under a sky going gold with evening in the backyard of the home they'd built out of a chance nobody was supposed to get twice. And when Ryan kissed her, the whole small crowd of the people who loved them stood up and cheered, and Emily laughed against his mouth, and it was not the desperate dramatic thing either of them had once imagined at 22. It was quiet, and it was certain, and it was theirs. They did not go far for a honeymoon. Emily said she'd spent enough of her life chasing bigger and better and somewhere else, and all she wanted now was time. So they stayed home. They drank coffee on the porch in the mornings. They walked the neighborhood in the evenings. They went to the little market by the old mill and argued over tomatoes, and Ryan told her she was wrong, and he had a better idea, and she grinned every single time, because she'd waited a long time to be argued with by someone who thought she was worth arguing with. The house across the street rented out in the fall to a young woman named Dana, recently divorced, quiet, the kind of quiet Ryan recognized. She kept to herself the first week. She flinched a little when people spoke to her too suddenly. And one morning, Emily filled 2 cups of coffee, one with too much cream, and walked across the street and knocked on the door. And when Dana opened it, looking wary and tired, Emily held out the cup and said, "Hi, I'm your neighbor. I lived in this house once. I know exactly how it feels to move somewhere new when you're still putting yourself back together. So I brought you coffee, no strings, just a neighbor." And Ryan, watching from his own porch, saw the young woman's guard come down by a single degree, saw her take the cup, saw the 2 women start to talk, and he understood that the thing he'd hoped for had come true. The kindness kept moving. It had crossed the street to Emily a year ago, and now Emily was carrying it back across to someone else who needed it. That was how it worked, he thought. That was the only way any of it ever worked. You get pulled out of the dark by someone brave enough to reach in, and then someday when you're strong enough, you become the arm that reaches. That night, Emily came home glowing. "She's going to be okay," she said. "Dana, she's got that look, scared but not broken. She just needs someone to remind her she's not crazy for a while." She sat down next to Ryan on the porch and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm going to be that someone. I'm going to bring her coffee every morning until she doesn't flinch anymore." "You know," Ryan said, "when I brought you that first cup of coffee, I told myself I was just being a good neighbor. It took me weeks to admit I was in love with you. I'd been in love with you for 12 years. "I know," Emily said. "I could tell. You're a terrible liar. You brought me the coffee with too much cream. A good neighbor doesn't remember how you take your coffee after 12 years. Only a man who never stopped thinking about you remembers that." Ryan laughed. "Caught me from the first cup." "From the first cup," she agreed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said softly, "Do you ever think about it? How close we came to never having this? If I'd married a different man, or moved to a different city, or if that house had rented to someone else, if you'd taken a different job 6 years ago, 100 things had to go exactly right or exactly wrong for a moving truck to stop across the street from the one man I was too scared to reach for at 22. I try not to think about it," Ryan admitted. "It's too big. It scares me more than Daniel ever did. All of the ways we could have missed each other." "But we didn't," Emily said. She lifted her head and looked at him, and her eyes in the porch light were clear and certain and completely unafraid. "That's the part I've decided to believe in. Not that we were destined or that it was fate or any of that. Just that we got a second chance, and this time we were brave enough to take it. That's the whole miracle. Not that life gave us another shot, that we finally stopped being too afraid to reach for it." Ryan took her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the way he had 1,000 times now, the way he intended to for the rest of his life. "I used to believe that missing your chance meant the story was over," he said quietly. "I built my whole life around that regret. I really thought the best thing that could ever happen to me had already happened, and I'd let it walk away." He looked at her. "But I was wrong. Sometimes life doesn't give you back the person you lost. Sometimes it gives you something better. It gives you the chance to meet them again when you're finally ready to love them the right way." Emily smiled and leaned in and rested her forehead against his, and across the street a light came on in the window of a young woman who was going to be okay because a brave woman had walked across the street with a cup of coffee. "The person living across the street," Emily whispered, "was the person I was always meant to find." "And the second time around," Ryan said, "I wasn't going to let one more day go by without crossing that street." They sat together on the porch of the home they had built out of a chance nobody was supposed to get twice. Two people who had survived time and mistakes and fear, and one very charming, very dangerous man, and had come out the other side still holding on to each other. The greatest love stories are not the ones that begin perfectly. They are the ones that survive everything and still find their way home. Ryan Mitchell had found his home 30 feet from his own front door on an ordinary Tuesday when he was finally brave enough to cross the street. And he was never for the rest of his life going to stop being grateful that he did.